So Melissa put this together, and I very much appreciate that. I don't know what my problem is. One of these days, maybe I'm getting old. I don't know. Maybe the brain cells aren't firing up like they used to. I don't get it. So hopefully we'll be okay. But we're going to take a look at Hebrews chapter 6, verses 7 through the end of the chapter. And I'm just going to read that real quick. It says, "Land that drinks in the rain, often falling on it, and that produces a crop useful to those whom it is farmed, receives the blessing of God. But land that produces thorns and thistles is worthless, and is in danger of being cursed. In the end, it will be burned. Even though we speak like this, dear friends, we are confident of better things in your case, things that accompany salvation. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him as you have helped his people and continue to help them. We want each of you to show the same diligence to the very end in order to make your hope sure. We do not want you to become lazy, but to imitate those who through faith and patience inherit what has been promised. When God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself, saying, I will surely bless you and give you many descendants. And so after waiting patiently, Abraham received what was promised. Men swear by someone greater than themselves, and the oath confirms what is said and puts an end to all argument. Because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hopes offered to us may be greatly encouraged. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain, where Jesus, who went before us, has entered on our behalf. He has become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And as I take a look at this, what we've got going on in these first few verses here in this land imagery right here is still part of the warning that we talked about in chapter 5, 11 through 6, verse 6. And as we see this, we realize that really this is a very, very harsh warning. This is a very, very dangerous situation that our author wants to lay out before us. He wants to know how important the message is. He wants us to know how important what God has promised is. He wants us to know that really falling away is no option whatsoever. And so he talks about it in some of the absolute most stark terms. He talks about falling away and the impossibility of being brought back to repentance because they are crucifying the Son of God all over again and subjecting him to public disgrace. We see this in chapter 6. We see all of this. And so when he goes into chapter 6, verse 7, when he starts writing these things, he starts talking about two different types of land. Now, one of the things that I love about metaphors in the Bible is sometimes they get messy. You know, we talk about mixed metaphors. Really, in a lot of ways, what we have in the Bible are some of those mixed metaphors. And the authors will use a metaphor, and then they'll use another metaphor, and they allude to different things, and they're talking about things in similar ways. But sometimes it gets all kind of murky in terms of exactly what the metaphor is and what it's actually referring to. But in this situation, what is clear is that there are two different types of lands. And really, as we think about this, I'm reminded of some of the words Jesus said as we talk about the parable of the sower. And we know that parable. We know what happened in that particular parable. If we take a look at Luke chapter 8. What we have a sower, and what is going on is a farmer went out and he sows the seed, and he's scattering the seed, and some fell along the path and was trampled on, and the birds of the air ate it up. Some fell on rock, and when it came up, the plants withered because they had no moisture. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up with it and choked the plant. Still other seed fell on good soil. It came up and yielded the crop 100 times more than what was sown. And so he says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. And what he's saying is, you want to be this good soil. You want to make sure that you're actually growing things that are worth something. But we also have the parable of the weeds in Matthew 13, 24 through 30. And in that particular situation, it's a little bit different in what is going on there. But what happens in this particular parable, in this particular passage, there is a farmer who goes out and he plants seed. For while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. And when the weeds sprouted and formed heads, the weeds also appeared. And the owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where did the weeds come from? An enemy did this, he replied. The servant said, Do you want us to go and pull them up? No, he answered. Because while you are pulling the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, First collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, and gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. We're mindful of Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 through 18, where God says, Cursed is the land because of you. And by the sweat of your brow you will work it, and it will produce thorns, and it will produce thistles, and it will be difficult for you. And so we have all of this imagery, and I think that as the readers are looking at this and thinking about this, they cannot help but think about Jesus' words. They cannot help but think about cursed land. They cannot help but think about these things regardless of where they are growing up, regardless of the fact that they grew up in an agrarian society, regardless if they would understand these things, they would also understand Jesus' words. They would also understand the Genesis story, being Hebrew. They would understand all of this. And so they're thinking about this to themselves. Are we good land? Or are we bad land? And what's happening is that bad land will be cursed, and the end will be burned. Well, Mr. Author, this is heavy stuff. This is not easy to swallow. This is not easy to take. And so what we have coming right on the heels of this actually is a message of encouragement. And I think that we have to see this. We have to see it as a constant warning as we are taking a look at what is going on here. The constant warning can lead to a type of despair. And so what he ends up doing is he says, even though we speak like this, and really what I love about this particular passage is this writer, this author is very concerned for his hearers. He's concerned that they may stand a chance of falling away. But in here he holds out the hope. And he says, even though we speak like this, dear friends, we are confident of better things in your case. Things that accompany salvation. And so, you've got to understand this. I am looking at you and I am seeing something that is good. I am continuing to call you friends. I am continuing to call you brothers and sisters. I am continuing to see in you that which God is working through. And you need to understand this because as I am giving you these warnings, I understand, if I'm talking as the author, I understand that I can really, really hit you with all these warnings and you're going to get discouraged. I deal with emotionally disturbed students on a daily basis. And I cannot tell you how many of them are that way because they've simply given up. Because all they get over and over and over again is constant criticism. And eventually they say, what's the point? What's the point? There's nothing I can do anyway. I may as well not even try. Their author wants them to see, look, I see something in you that is better than that. I know that you can do this. And so he ties it to what they have accomplished themselves. You have helped God's people. You have been diligent so far. You have done all of these things. And I want to make it clear to you, as you have done this, you have followed Abraham's example. This is huge for these particular people because they are Jews. They are of the Hebrew lineage. And so they're understanding this. And if you want to tie it to a person of faith, if you want to make sure that you understand that you're doing the right thing, let me tie you to Abraham. And so this is what he does. And so we have Abraham. And this is what we see in verse 15. God has promised some things to Abraham. And so it says, after waiting patiently, Abraham received what was promised. Now I like to look at this and I think that our author is probably saying, you know what? We all understand the story of Abraham. And it's kind of, when we talk about patience, we talk about the patience of Job. But how about the patience of Abraham? Because he was 75 years old when God told him, I want you to leave your country and I want you to leave your family and I want you to go to the land that I am promising to you and your descendants. And he's 75 years old and he takes his young 60-something-year-old wife with him. Okay? And they go off. Okay, God, I'm going. Okay, this is where you brought us. And they come to the land of Canaan. And he spent years there. And constantly what is going on in all of this is God is promising him, hey, I'm going to give you this land to your descendants. And so finally, when Abraham is 99 years old, God says, you're going to have a son. Sarah, his wife, who was 90 at the time, laughs and says, is this even possible? And then she gives birth to a son. Abraham waited patiently and received what was promised. I am mindful of Paul's words that your light and momentary troubles are creating for you a greater inheritance than you could ever imagine in Ephesians. And I'm thinking of these particular readers, and they're thinking, okay, let's take a look at Abraham. He endured from age 75 to 99, and he is given a son, one son. By the way, God tells him to sacrifice a little bit later. But we'll get into that a little bit later on in the book. But it's patient endurance, and what is going on is Abraham received what was promised, but not the full fulfillment of it. This right here is the start of it all. And so there's this spark that Abraham has, that God has been faithful, and God has been working, and now he has a son, and he knows it's going to happen, and he sees it coming to fruition, and he sees it all happening, but he waited patiently. You guys over here who are being persecuted, you Hebrews that are being persecuted in all of this, you have been working, you have been helping God's people, you have done this. I want you to show the same diligence to the very end to make your hope sure. I want you to be patient and enduring in all of this so that you can inherit what has been promised in verse 12. This is what we are looking at. Follow Abraham's example. Do this. But that encouragement is rooted in God. It is rooted completely in God and in his nature. And as we take a look at this, we see an appeal in verse 10 to his justice. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him as you have helped his people and continue to help them. Now, I've said this in this congregation before, and I don't know, I'm going to do a pop quiz right here. When we are talking about justice in the Bible, what is the synonym for justice in the Bible? Righteousness. And what we have here is, in the Bible, when we see that word justice, we can also insert the word righteousness. And what I see by this is God is going to do right by you. He's going to do what's right by you. He's going to see you through. He's going to make sure that everything is okay for you. He is going to work through you, and he's going to do this. He is not unjust. He will not forget his work. And as we talk about who God is in his very nature, that justice and that righteousness is part and parcel of who he is, along with his holiness and along with his love. Those three things are absolutely critical for us to understand about our God. He is love, he is just, and he is holy. And the appeal right here, what we have is rooted in the very nature of who he is. What we also see is that he comes to us. He has come to us. He is continually coming to us. In Genesis chapter 15, we're not going to read that entire chapter, but we have looked at this before, and I want us to go through it again. We need to understand that God is always coming to us on our terms. He does not need to do this, but he is always coming to us on our terms. And so what does he do in chapter 15 of Genesis? He promises Abraham, don't be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. And Abram, in chapter 15, verse 2, says, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. You have not given me any children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. And then what is going on is God says, look, I want you to understand fully that what I am doing is right by you. I'm going to fulfill my promise. I am going to confirm it with an oath. And those are those two things that Hebrew is talking about, by two immutable things that God cannot lie. He has given us his oath, and he has given us his promise. And this is what he does. He said, I want you to take some animals. And I want, he doesn't even say, he says, if you bring me a heifer, a goat, a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. And Abraham brought all these to him, and he cuts them in two. Because what is going on here is, Abraham knew how covenants were done. And they're done by taking these animals, splitting them in two, killing them, putting them on either side of a trench, and letting that blood run into that trench. And then what happens is, the person who is making the oath walks through that blood in that trench and says, I am making an oath that what I say I will fulfill, what I say I will do. And if I do not fulfill that oath, may it be to me as these slaughtered animals. May my blood be trampled on. Abraham is filled with great fear, but he understands something. God is serious. He has come to us and he has made his oath to Abraham. But the thing is that this promise extends to his descendants. This is what we say on this. He says, when God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself, saying, I will surely bless you and give you many descendants. That's us. It's people of faith. And in verse 17 it says this. It says, because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath. And I look at this and I say, he wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear. He hasn't changed since Abraham. He's the same as he always was. We sing the song, hold to God's unchanging hand. This is true. He will fulfill every single promise. He will fulfill every single oath. The only reason why he gives the oath is because we're so weak we need it. And it extends even to us. We are heirs of that promise. This fills us with a hope. Again, I am mindful of songs that we sing and things that we do on this. We have this hope in verse 9 as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters through. Hold on, I got ahead of myself. Verse 18, God did this by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie. We who have fled to take hold of the hope offered to us may be greatly encouraged. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain where Jesus, who went before us, has entered on our behalf. He has become a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And as I take a look at this, I think about this imagery that we have fled to him, that our hope is in him, that we see this. And the imagery that I have here, because we are thinking about an anchor, I'm thinking about where have we fled to? What have we fled from? We are taking a look at this imagery, and I'm thinking of a boat. And I'm thinking about a boat that is tossed on the sea, a boat that has absolutely no hope whatsoever. And we flee to God. We flee to him for our relief. And it becomes the anchor for our soul. Because Jesus Christ himself has tied it there. And when I think about all that we've talked about on this, and as we're talking about how God comes to us and he makes his promise secure to us, and he makes it on our terms, not his own. He does all of this, and it is impossible for him to lie, and all this kind of stuff. He is coming to us, and finally, one of the greatest themes that we see in all of Hebrews, that we've seen from the very beginning, is he has come to us in the form of his Son. And so it's not a matter of us just flailing around and finally catching that anchor. But it's rather as Jesus has come to us and said, here, hold on to this anchor, and I'm dragging you along, and I'm putting it into the most holy place, and you're there with me. That's where you are. And that's what God has done. It is the certainty of his promise. As I think about our own lives and about all the insecurities that we face and all the trouble that we have, we talked about it a little bit in class with the outside world and how it tries to take away our joy and how it does all of this. I think about this. We have an anchor. We have an anchor that is tied directly to the promises of God. We don't have to be tossed about. We don't have to be seasick. We don't have to be lost. But because we hold on to God and to Jesus, we have this hope. This hope is available to every single person. This hope is available to all who would flee to him. And so we offer an invitation every single week for all and any who would come to accept Jesus through the waters of baptism, being joined together in his death, burial, and resurrection, to be raised a new person, a new creature, blameless and pure, a child of God in his sight. And if this is the decision that you've made today, please come as we stand and sing.